if you zoom out on the graph of their success, it's going to look like an arrow going straight up. It's going to look like a hockey stick. But if you zoom in, the analogy I use is the staircase analogy. There's a long flat period, a sudden increase, and then another long flat period, right? And I think a lot of times when you're at a plateau, you have to fundamentally understand that's when you are investing, okay? And again, you have to be doing it correctly, right? You have to be eating the right foods, getting the sleep, putting the right training in. You're investing. And then out of nowhere, generally, you see huge leaps forward.
All right, everyone. Welcome to the Rise 41 podcast. Today with me, I have Coach Eric Prusch, strength coach, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belt, and no BS voice in the fitness industry, which is how I found him on Instagram. We've crossed paths with our messaging, which is somewhat similar, but we'll get into that. Your approach, Eric, tell me if I'm right here, it's rooted in simplicity, discipline, and brutal honesty. And you've coached everyday athletes and high performers alike, and you don't just preach optimization if I'm right. You live this. You actually live what you coach.
I would say I try to.
Yeah.
We're all doing the best that we can, for sure.
Yes.
You know what I mean? There are challenges in life that sometimes get in the way, but you always got to keep moving forward, Gonzo.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, tell us a little bit about yourself. Let's get the audience some background so they understand where we're coming from.
Sure. I mean, my road to this, I don't if it's typical or atypical, but like a lot of guys, I'm a millennial, so I'm 39. I just turned 39 last month. And I grew up enamored by these action films. You know what I mean? I was never someone who liked... I wasn't a weird emo kid. I was someone who liked the masculine culture of the 80s. So of course, as I look past my camera, there's a Bloodsport poster right over there. Love the Rocky films. Of course, everyone loved Arnold back then, and I also loved professional wrestling. And so there was always this obsession with wanting to be big and strong. And the thing is, I don't think I actually have terribly good genetics for getting big and strong. I have better genetics probably for endurance. And I think the reason why I got so into the coaching side of it was I wanted to improve and I was struggling to improve. And this is, the early days of the internet. You had like Ian King was posting articles back then. He was kind of like the guy. Joe DeFranco was kind of coming up, and I started reading about Westside Barbell.
Okay.
Paths of types of training that were off the beaten path, off of the conventional type of bro split type of stuff. And from there, before I knew it, I was the guy that my friends would come to for advice. Like, hey, how do I get big? How do I get strong? I can't lose weight. And it was like, you know what? I've dedicated a lot of time to this. And at the heart of it, I love to help people. Almost to a fault, because I think there have been times where I probably invest too much time in people who don't want to help themselves, which is a very frustrating aspect of coaching, no question about it. But I love to help people see what fitness and discipline has done for my life, and it's, I would say, part of my life's mission to share that with people and empower them.
Gotcha. So this leads to the first question, which is, on your bio, I think you say, and correct me if I'm wrong, simple is always best. Let your clients' results do the talking, I think. It's one of the things that I found. So what does simple look like in practice for your coaching style? Like, how do you approach your clients, especially if they're new or novices?
Sure. I mean, obviously, it depends on the goal, right? If someone wants to get bigger, or if they want to lose weight, there's going to be some things that we obviously kind of tweak. But I think you always want to challenge your clients, of course, but you want to challenge them just one level above, maybe even a little bit less, half a level above where they're at, especially with novices. Because one of the things that's I've become painfully aware of as a coach and now as a father and as a husband is we don't really do hard stuff anymore, right? And most guys we're not men, unfortunately, from the 1910s who were going to work in a coal mine, or who could be at a local watering hole and be challenged to a fisticuffs at any point in time. People are soft, and so training is something that I think it's a type of challenge you have to seek out to harden yourself to become a better man. or a better woman, although most of my demographic is certainly men. And so with that in mind, if you're dealing with a novice who has, say, no athletic background, you're going to want to challenge them half a level to one level above where they are. So if someone is completely new, I'd realistically just be looking at compliance and lifestyle. Are you getting to the gym? Are you getting the workouts in? Is your sleep improving? Are you hydrated? Okay, that's like the basic stuff, you know?
So the big rocks, you're talking about moving the big rocks that make it the biggest difference.
For sure.
Okay.
For sure.
Okay.
And look, like you and I both know, as a coach, you could be obsessed with the minutia. Oh, how many sets should I do at or above 90%?
Yeah.
1 rep max or something. The reality is that shit only matters if you're trying to be elite or you're a higher level intermediate lifter and you've already got your sleep, your diet, your hydration, your stress levels under control. And I think that's probably one of the first things that I would preach is just get all of the big rocks. That's your foundation. You can't build a pyramid upside down, right? It's going to fall over almost immediately. So we have to start building that base pretty much right away. Once that's instilled with the client or the athlete, obviously from there we could talk about particular training methods, but I think a lot of people overlook basic stuff. I mean, Gonzo, how many times have you trained a client and maybe they're asking you about TRT or maybe even anabolic steroids or something, and you talk to them and they sleep 4 hours a night?
Yeah.
What are we doing? What are we doing?
Yeah.
You know, it's
why are we even starting
so
that
simple,
conversation?
So simple, you know.
So let's see. Speaking of that, like for example, those were those brutal truths we were talking about. So you, it seems you post reels where you push a lot against like a lot of industry myths that you can do training in 15 minutes or less. For example, are there any myths in particular, or any practices in lately? Let's say, because of course, different modalities come in and out of style. People get attracted to different things. Are there any myths or are things out there in like the world of social media that just fire you up? Like, my God, why are we doing this?
Sure.
Anything?
Sure. I would say, like you mentioned, modalities come in and out. And a lot of these modalities, there's truth to them. Like when I was younger, everybody hated steady state cardio. You had to do intervals. Yeah. If you didn't do intervals, you were a pussy. And steady state cardio, it doesn't work. And now it's swung the other direction where people only do steady state cardio and like no one's actually training hard. But the truth is, there's obvious good stuff to take away from both sides of that pendulum, right? You should use both methods. So if we're going to take a real 30,000 or 100,000 foot view of this, I would say people who speak in absolute truths about a lot of training methodologies really piss me off, because the reality is so many different methods do work, assuming that you believe in the program, you train hard, and your recovery is under wraps, right? So let's say someone says you have to get a pump to grow muscles. Well, actually, not really, right? Because progressive overload, we know, does work for building muscle. And a lot of guys that you're talking about that are relying on a pump, generally speaking, they might have great genetics. They might have taken the progressive overload to its absolute limit, to the point of where they need more volume because the risk of adding 20 pounds onto a 455 incline bench press outweighs the rewards, things like that. But I think people who just step back and say, you should never train this way, you should never train that way. Yes, of course, like there are some claims you can make that would likely be universally true, but the individual has to be taken into account. And not just the individual at that exact point in their life, right? Because what you do now, you probably couldn't have done 10 years ago, and vice versa, right? Things change, you change, right? So any notion that training somebody or training yourself is not a moving target, I find to be really, really maddening.
Yeah, because it doesn't life is not static, Life is entropy and movement and dynamics. Precisely. So it's not that simple. Okay, so here's another question. So as we mentioned before, you are a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Yes, sir.
How has training in a martial art like that and Jiu-Jitsu is special to me because it's a martial art that's practical, that's real, that's applicable. It has more of the martial than the art, let's say, right? So how has that shaped your perspective on, because, you said you grew up watching, like I did, like the 80s movies and the 90s stuff. So that's, strength training, more the, quote unquote meathead kind of approach. But by learning about BJJ and all that, how has that like shaped your perspective on strength conditioning and coaching? How do you marry those two?
That's a great question, and there's a lot of meat on the bone there because I do think there's a great story. You know who Eddie Bravo is, famous jiu-jitsu coach. He's always on Joe Rogan's podcast.
Absolutely.
He used to tell these stories about how within a fighter's camp, like a mixed martial artist camp, back in the day, you would have a boxing coach, a kickboxing coach, a wrestling coach, a jiu-jitsu coach, and every single coach is kind of like instilling in the fighter, at least the bad coaches were, use my method to win this fight. They kind of want their teaching to be what carries the guy over the top, even if it's not necessarily what's best for the fighter itself.
Right.
I bring that up because when I got into jiu-jitsu, I've had two stints with jiu-jitsu. I started, I want to say, in 05 or 06. I trained for about 2 years, and back then jiu-jitsu was different. It was just before John Danaher came along, and before it was very restrictive back then. There were less ways to win. If you couldn't do what your coach did, you probably weren't going to have success. Once social media exploded, all of a sudden there's different styles for different body types. And I had a smaller instructor. I really wasn't enjoying it. So I took about 7 years off and I got into competitive powerlifting, where naturally, like, strength is everything, right? I mean, that's literally the goal, is to lift the most weight
it's the
possible.
Efficient movement of extremely heavy weight.
Precisely. Whenever you're doing something, to do it to the best of your ability, you really have to believe in it, even if it's not true. So as a powerlifter, of course, I prioritized, and I would say even over-prioritized, strength, because to me, strength meant winning. It meant being the big dog in the room. It meant, pounds on the bar, PRs, all that stuff. And so when I quit powerlifting and got back into jiu-jitsu, it was kind of a kick in the face, because there have been very few rounds on the mat that I have lost because I was weaker than my opponent. Right? I was generally always stronger than my training partners. I was a 700 plus pound deadlifter. I had very good isometric strength, but I was losing to guys who were more technical, who were faster, who were certainly better conditioned. And so this is kind of a long way of saying, getting into jiu-jitsu made me realize that if you're coaching athletes, there are a lot of ways to win. And the way that you have to win is not the way that they have to win, right? Fundamentally, you have to only be strong enough, conditioned enough, and mobile enough to use your style as an athlete, or in this case, as a martial artist, at the highest possible level. Some guys need to be really strong because that's their style, and that's kind of tied to their personality, their sense of identity, and who they are, okay? Whereas other guys, they may need to be more mobile. They may depend more on using their gas tank to burn you out, and stuff like that. And so jiu-jitsu really taught me there are a lot of ways to win, a lot of ways to lose. And that when you're dealing with an athlete, again, a client that's just a gen pop person that comes to you and says, I want to bench 315.
Yeah, like a lifestyle guy that just wants to get in, a gym bro, like me.
Exactly. And that's fine, right? And if that's the case, we could put all of our eggs in that basket. People, fundamentally, you're going to do what you love. So if you love getting strong, even if you're not necessarily good at it, to do it, because otherwise the alternative is likely you're doing nothing, which is not acceptable, right? It's not acceptable. But jiu-jitsu definitely taught me how to become a more well-rounded coach. It taught me that I was over-prioritizing certain things in athletic development that maybe were not that important. And, there are a lot of guys that I've trained with over the years that on the mat, they feel like a gorilla. They feel impossibly strong. But then you lift weights with them, and their gym numbers are not that impressive, right? There is a specificity to all sports, and weight training can only take you so far before you have to become specifically strong in your chosen endeavor. And I think that's what martial arts really taught me.
Yeah. Okay. So, and it makes sense, because when you really look at the high performers in these fields, you can actually physically see the shape that's been created by being good at that sport. So you don't see you don't see not a lot of MMA guys that are like 6'5", 290 pounds. You're not going to see that a lot.
Yes.
But you do see a lot that are like 5'10", 160, and they're like wiry and fast and super strong because that's what the sport demands.
Exactly.
You know?
And it's also interesting. I love to think about systems. Like when you change a system, how does it affect every single thing downstream? That could be anything from a political system to, in this case, a training system, the human body. In MMA specifically, if you think about it, the financial incentive is not really there for a lot of bigger guys because there's more money to be made playing baseball, football, and
for sure
else. What you really see in MMA is and wrestling too, it's an outlet for phenomenal athletes who would be undersized to play conventional field sports in America. Right?
Oh, I'd never thought about it. That's a really interesting viewpoint. Okay.
If you're 5'10" and 175 pounds, you're not playing in the NFL. Doesn't matter how coordinated you are. Like, you would have to be such an exception to the rule that it almost would not be possible. And on top of that, scouts, coaches, their time is finite like all of ours. If they see someone who's 5'9", they're probably not going to look at him. Because fundamentally, there's a guy that's 6'2" that fits the mold that they've been told makes a good player for whatever position.
They got 20 guys like that.
Exactly. You know what I mean? And so you'd have to, I can think of a few NFL players who were undersized, and almost always their route to the NFL was extremely unconventional, where they had to prove themselves elsewhere, right?
Or they had some kind of special talent for a thing that made them, really good at that, at whatever that is.
Exactly.
So, okay, no, that makes perfect sense. So here's a post of yours that I ran it across, and I kind of liked it, but I wanted to see take your thoughts on it. And it was this: you said something along the lines of, if you're training to get tired and feel good, you need a therapist and not a gym membership, which really struck me as funny, but funny in a very dead accurate kind of a way. So how do you define training to improve versus training to exhaust? Can you share that with the audience?
Well, the root of that actually comes from, I got my start in the industry. I was very spoiled because I was literally working with really, really good youth and college athletes, right after I finished interning. And so I coached that demographic for about 3 or 4 years. I left that job and I opened my own gym, which I've since left. Recently, I closed it down and now I work exclusively remote. When I went to opening my own business, I was working with a lot more general population. And what I noticed was I was working with people who, in many respects, were high performers at their jobs. They were really, really stressed out. I could think of a few lawyers that I knew that were like this. And they would come to the gym and kind of seek out the pain just so they could get that brief release from their mental stress at the end of the workout. And I could understand that to an extent. Anyone who likes to train hard is a little bit of a pain junkie. Myself included.
Yeah. And you get that nice little serotonin dopamine release at the end, right?
Of course.
So, yeah.
But what I found was with a lot of these people, the juice wasn't always worth the squeeze because, if you're stressed out, you're not sleeping, you're not eating, you're not hydrated, you get injured. And now you can't train. And now it's worse. And then the people that depend on that method, okay, so I get hurt, I have to take time off. Well, guess what? I only know how to train ridiculously hard. So now I jump back into the way I used to train. I'm less prepared than I used to be. I get hurt again, and that cycle just becomes vicious. And that's how people quit or, get seriously injured, and they get frustrated, and that's not acceptable. So I think when you're talking about training, and this is something that I definitely learned from Jiu-Jitsu, which is being on the mat and being present in the moment is the most important thing for success. The guys who go in and train 3 days a week or 2 days a week and they go crazy hard never progress as much as the guys that train 5 to 6 days a week but keep the intensity under control because they're practicing the skill. They're getting more rounds in, they're getting more time in. And granted, we're talking about maybe the cognitive aspect of jiu-jitsu as opposed to just pure physical improvement, but I do think, especially as it pertains to conditioning, which is what I was talking about when I made that video, conditioning has to be trained frequently, and you can't train, in zone 5 days a week.
Right.
It simply can't be done. I mean, I've seen guys do it. You could do it for a brief period of time. You could push a lot of older school American wrestling training was like this, where wrestlers from the 70s and 80s and 90s would train crazy hard. If they were good enough to qualify for the Olympics, a lot of times they would survive one Olympic cycle and their body's destroyed. They're 27 years old, right? Whereas the Russians had it down to where a lot of times they would wrestle hard 2 or 3 days a week. They would do a lot of steady state cardio, a lot of strength training, and you see a lot of Soviet wrestlers had a lot of success for periods of 8 to sometimes 16 years, okay, as a result of saving their body. And the other thing that I would say, I know I'm talking too much here, Gonzo, I apologize.
No, take your time. This is great information. This is awesome.
Willpower is a finite resource.
Yes.
We as men that love to train and we idolize Van Damme or whatever, we have this switch in our head that's like, force yourself to do it or you're a pussy. Well, guess what? That definitely can work, but it also works better when you're younger because you have less responsibilities, right?
Yes.
So you could go burn through that willpower in the gym and go to your boring, shitty job, because like a lot of guys have in their 20s, the people that are working part-time gigs till they get out of college, and almost recover. When you have kids, a wife, you run a business, that requires will. And you can't go into a situation with your wife or kids or your business cognitively and mentally fried and not having that ability to push into those endeavors. And I think that that's a super, super important thing, especially when training athletes, because we as strength coaches, again, we think that what we have the athletes do matters the most, when actually it matters the least. Playing the sport is what matters the most, right? So we have to give them enough will to push through in their actual sports practice, because a guy that benches 405 but doesn't know how to fight is going to get his ass kicked by a guy that benches 135 and knows how to fight. Right?
Yeah,
it's,
for sure.
It's that simple. It's that simple. And I do think we live in America has been in a crazy place for the last several decades in particular. And I'm not getting political. It's just people are obviously more stressed out. You can see it wherever you go. Okay.
Yeah.
And so I think people are looking for that release. They're looking for that brief respite from how crazy the world is sometimes through their training. And I understand that because I do the same thing. But training for mental release is just not the same thing as training for improvement.
Right.
And you have to make that decision. Are you doing this as a form of therapy? Okay, if you are, your ceiling is going to be a lot lower than someone who has a plan and who has a specific goal.
And your approach is going to be completely different too, because now it's almost like, so one thing I've noticed, like in my case, it's been about 8 or 9 years since I, lost all the weight and got serious about fitness and all that. And one thing I've noticed is that a lot of times, I'd say 95% of the people that I see at the gym look the same year in and year out. They just look the same. And then you start noticing, like, there's not that intensity. And it's almost like, okay, so these guys are working out. They're not really training. Mm-hmm. And there's that mental difference, right? Of like, and I mean, that's okay if what you want to do, like you're at a fitness level that you're happy with, and all you want to do is maintain, and like you said, use it for the mental distress and that approach. Mm-hmm. But I think like a lot of clients get themselves into mental trouble by not realizing the difference that you point out, that they get themselves into a situation like, well, why am I not progressing? It's like, well, because you're not training with intensity, with intent, with a plan.
Yes.
So it does seem that way.
The real eye-opener for me on this topic, Gonzo, was when I was coming up as a coach is when CrossFit really broke through and became mainstream.
Oh,
everyone was going, and listen, I'm not a CrossFit hater, like it repopularized barbell training, it got people used to working hard. These are all great things. But I noticed that the guys that were competing in the CrossFit games, so the elite level, they did not train like the average CrossFitter. They didn't just show up and do the workout of the day. They had organized strength training. They had organized endurance training. So
and it was personalized, right?
Yes,
it was personal.
A lot of times a lot of those guys would use like a conjugate or West Side style model for training. They would train speed strength on one day, max strength on the other. The assistance work might be more based around a Metcon than like doing repetition work for muscle size and whatnot. And so what does that tell you? People who are training for the most exhausting stuff don't actually fully exhaust themselves every day. Sure, obviously, 2 or 3 days of that week, and maybe more depending on how far out the competition is probably horrifyingly grueling. I mean, there's 100%, you could never take it away from them, but they know that they can't do it every single day, right? And fundamentally, if you can't do what you're doing on a long enough timeline, like you said, you're just not going to see the results that you want to see. Now, If you don't care, whatever, then I don't care. Go do your own thing. But if you do care and you're not getting where you want to go, then we have to think about a plan. We have to think about what's going to contribute to your success, not just let me just go move around like crazy and get the hell out of the gym.
Gotcha. Okay, so which leads into another fun question or conversation to have. And so I've noticed that you've cautioned people against imitating the elite. And we were just talking about the elite, like in CrossFit, for example, right? And instead asking, what is it that the elite build? So what's one thing you think that separates those top performers from your average person that most people they just don't realize that?
It's a great question, Gonzo. I think, first of all, nature is not fair.
Yeah.
Okay. And we have to understand
Yep.
that. I mean, listen, I'm a religious person, so I think we could say maybe, God has given us all individual talents in certain areas, right? But obviously, if you have a propensity for intellectual accomplishment, that does not necessarily carry over to being a powerlifter or a football player, right? It's sure
Right.
you have a 160 IQ, but that doesn't mean you're going to be great at football. And there might be guys that are millionaires from playing football who could barely read. I mean, we've literally seen this happen. So this is the spectrum that we work on. I think this was a real kick in the face to me. I had a training partner, my friend Dom. He's one of the most talented athletes I've ever seen, and this dude would just take a year off from training, come into the gym, squat 7, bench 4, pull 7. Had it not worked out, he's just a freak. And when he worked, he was capable of some of the most impressive human feats of strength in history, right? So the first thing you have to accept is that nature is not fair, okay? And that sometimes people who are really talented can get away with doing things that just won't work for the average person, right? That's first and foremost. A very specific example would be, if you think about bodybuilding. A lot of times guys that talk about just getting a pump, again, they're universalizing their approach to bodybuilding in this case. And the reality is the level of stimulus that needs to be applied to the muscle to make the muscle grow is different for each person. Everyone has seen those guys, they're very rare, who are really jacked but they're not really strong. That's someone who needs very little genetic signaling to actually grow, right?
Right.
They could get a pump with the 25s and have 19-inch arms. Right?
Yeah.
And so what they're saying fundamentally does not work for you, right? Like they are so gifted that throw it out, okay? You need to look at what methods have worked for the largest sample size, right? It's absolutely true. Now, what you can learn from elites who have trained properly is you have to, and this is more available now because of social media and marketing, you can't look at what Jay Cutler was doing to peak for the Olympia at the height of his career if you are 16 years old and haven't lifted before. You should be looking at, maybe this is an unfair example, but you should be looking at what Jay Cutler did when he was 16 years old. Okay, and you're going to have to follow that path. There was a very famous powerlifter back in the day. His name was Andrei Malanichev, this giant Russian guy, and I think he was one of the first guys to squat 1,000 pounds just in a belt and knee wraps. Okay, so no like suit or anything like that.
Right.
And everybody was like, "Well, look at Malanichev. He does he squats like once a week, and he only does like 3 or 4 sets." And it's like, look, dude. First of all, if your 1 rep max is 315. It's not the same thing as having a 1 rep max of 1,000. The physiological stress is not the same thing. Okay,
not even close.
He could only physically afford to go to that well maybe once a week, maybe once a month. Okay,
right.
And obviously he's working up so many sets to get to that 1,000 that there's hidden training volume in that program. He's going from 1 plate to however many kilos are going to be on each side. That could be 12 working sets, right, before he gets there. So we need to look at what Malanichev did to build the capacity to be able to squat that way, not what he's doing like now as a, I don't know how old he was back then, we'll say 35, 38-year-old man who's had 25 years of lifting experience. It's a long journey,
For sure. Yeah. For sure. So let's see. We kind of alluded at this, but I would like to hear more if you have any more thoughts on, as a husband, father, and you coach, how do you balance those demands of coaching people while also being present in your personal life? I assume you have like many clients, and clients demand attention, time, personalization. So what are your thoughts? How do you balance that, like the coaching side with like the personal side?
So I know that you said you liked my direct approach, so we'll just be as direct as possible.
Yeah.
That was a change that I really had to make recently.
Okay.
I ran it, like I said, I was coaching people, in person going back to, I don't know, 2009, 2010, something like that. In 2015, I opened my own gym. I ran that for 10 years. I had a business partner. He left about 2 years before I closed it down. So you're talking about 15 consecutive years of coaching as my gig. When I was younger and I didn't have a wife and kids, or maybe I just had a wife and no kids, I found that coaching people was more universally enjoyable. I would look at who was coming in that night and I'd be really excited. Oh, this is going to be a fun session. And then as I got older and I needed more energy to support my wife with the children or whatever, I started to realize that I was giving away large pieces of myself to people that didn't want their success as much as I did. And part of my desire to close my gym down and go remote was simply because I wanted to have more control over who had access to me.
Gotcha.
I just, when you're running a brick and mortar business, geography is really the main thing that is going to determine who you get. You could have great content. People could love you. If they live in Wyoming, they're not training with me in New York, period.
Right.
And obviously you have expenses to pay, rented. These things are very expensive in New York. And so you're going to have to deal with a lot of things, a lot of people that maybe they don't fit you from a cultural perspective. They're not there to train hard. And I just found like I wasn't enjoying it. And so when I was able to switch to more remote training, I had control over who had access to me, and I was able to screen for better clients by virtue of having a broader net to cast. Right, I could train someone who lives in Germany right now. Right, if I wanted to. Right, so
sure.
This is, I think, helped me get a better quality client who expects the type of things that I would expect from myself. Right,
Gotcha.
And fundamentally, Gonzo, you totally understand this. Like, we should always try to understand the world from the perspective of other people, but we always still have our own perspective. We're always going to be biased. And yes, that could be a good thing and a bad thing, but you have to come to terms with it. Like, I love to train. I've always made time to train going back to when I was 14 years old. And I can't understand people who don't want to make time to train.
Yeah,
and
true.
For a while, I told myself, well, I should try to understand it so I can help them. And I think that was a waste of time. I think what I really needed to do and what I'm doing now is, it's kind of like, all right, I'm running fast in this direction. You have to keep up. I'm not going to keep going back to save you.
Okay? To come and grab you and drag you along.
You have to want it. You have to want it. And so I think that one change helped me free up so much more energy and will for my family, for my own training, simply by just controlling who had access to my energy, to my will. I guess that's probably the theme of this podcast.
Yep.
Because I was just sick and tired of giving it all away. Now, we can talk pragmatically here. Like, I always try to get my training done. And it's funny, I've never been a morning person. And you and I in planning for this, you're like, oh, I'm up early. Dude, I've been one of those degenerate night guys my whole life. And then finally I realized, like, okay, I could do jiu-jitsu every day as long as it doesn't affect helping with the wife and kids. And guess what? I could fundamentally do that if I'm out of bed at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'm on the mat by 5:30, 6 in the morning.
Gotcha.
So, like, I've now become a morning trainer because I could get that over with. And the older I get, I'm sure you experience this too, Gonzo, the more I want to get the training over early. There's a natural element of, like, you work all day and you want to kind of ride that downward momentum to sleep. You don't want to have to go get up for a hard session at 6 o'clock at night and be in bed by 9. It's too much. It's too much. So changing my schedule, understanding that I had to change the type of habits that I had before to be able to live the lifestyle that I want to live has definitely freed that up a little bit more. And lastly, dude, my wife loves fitness because training is related to my career. She's very understanding with me making time to train. I get clients through going to jiu-jitsu class. I teach jiu-jitsu 2 days a week. So, like, I've been able to make it part of how I make my living, which means that I could go do what I got to do. Like, she would be way more pissed if my hobby was video games, which would say, in my perspective, would not make us any money. And so it's like, great, now you're just wasting time on this.
Yes.
Where with training, that's simply not the case.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a very good point. And having the spousal support is everything. Like, it's everything.
Gonzo, let me ask you a question. You're asking me questions. Have you ever trained someone, male or female, where you felt like the spouse was not supportive or perhaps not supportive to the extent of almost sabotage.
So like skeptical of of what we're doing? Yes.
Yeah.
I have.
And it's
Unfortunately.
very hard, right? It's very hard. Yeah.
It's almost like dragging weight. It's like you're helping pull the person along, like you said, or guiding them or pushing them in the right direction. You have this extra resistance that you don't know where it's coming from and that you can't work with directly because you're not engaged with that person. You're engaging with your client.
I've seen it, dude, so many times where a husband or a wife is trying to get in shape. And, like if my wife is training hard, part of me, is like, all right, listen, man, like I can't be the out of shape husband. I got to keep up with her. Like you want your spouse to be attracted to you, obviously. Okay.
Yes.
And for sure, it makes life. Well, you can get away with a lot more if you're good looking and take care of yourself. Let's just be totally honest.
Yeah,
there's a much bigger margin for error.
That's just life.
Yeah,
that's just
marriage.
Like you said, life is not fair sometimes, and that's one of those.
Yes. Yeah. And I've seen people take the opposite approach, where it's like, my husband is losing weight and getting in shape. I'm going to drag him down because I'm worried that he will look better than me and start to look at me in a different light.
Yeah.
And that, as a trainer, dude, that's almost impossible to overcome because that's like a marital issue. That's a personality issue. That's a self-worth issue. That is so far beyond either A, what we're capable of coaching, B, what we're willing to coach, or C, what is acceptable, right? Like, you just can't get in the middle of that. And so, to your point,
that's them.
Yeah. If your spouse is not behind you when you're doing something like this, I mean, look, I'm not going to say you shouldn't do it. You should always be healthy, but there's a lot of hard conversations that have to be had before you could go get it done. And so my wife supports it. She's great. And it also helped that this was what I did before we started dating.
So she knew. It was not a surprise. It was like, here, this is what I do. This is who I am. Yeah.
Because some people,
makes all the difference.
Not to sound disrespectful, but some people do fat person things. And they marry someone who also does fat person things. Okay, we're going to just smoke weed, eat a bunch of crappy food, and watch Netflix all the time.
Right.
And so when you sign on for a life with that person, that's what you think you're signing on for. And to almost defend the angry spouse here, when someone hits that switch and is like, no, I'm going to be a better person, to an extent, you're like, well, that's not what I signed up for.
It's like somebody pulled the rug out from under you, right?
Yes. And so I've always been obsessed with training, no matter what I was training for. And so my wife knew what she was getting into,
Okay. So it's always and speaking of clients, here's another question or consideration. And this is one that I sometimes struggle with a little bit. So do you have a process or principles or ideas when it comes to somebody who's stuck, who's like plateaued mentally or physically to break through? Do you have any advice on that? Because besides, I guess, understanding the motivator, if any, for whatever the reason is the plateau. But other than that, I would love to hear if you have any thoughts on that.
So the one thing I have noticed, I guess there's like 3 athletic endeavors that I've actually taken seriously in my life, right? There's like muscle building, or we'll say physique-related goals, strength-related goals, and jiu-jitsu. Right, martial arts. And I think if you look at a lot of people that have attained success in these endeavors, of course maybe they're not world champions, but success relative to their own genetic ability, if you zoom out on the graph of their success, it's going to look like an arrow going straight up. It's going to look like a hockey stick. But if you zoom in, the analogy I use is the staircase analogy. There's a long flat period, a sudden increase, and then another long flat period, right? And I think a lot of times when you're at a plateau, you have to fundamentally understand that's when you are investing, okay? And again, you have to be doing it correctly, right? You have to be eating the right foods, getting the sleep, putting the right training in. You're investing. And then out of nowhere, generally, you see huge leaps forward. Someone will be stuck. Like, I've had times in the past where I'm trying to put on muscle, right? And I'll pick a number. I'm at 230 pounds, and I'm stuck. And then all of a sudden, 233, 235, 237. And it happens very, very quickly. But it's not what you did the week that you gained 3 pounds of muscle. Not that you could 3 pounds of muscle, you don't gain that in a week. That's
for sure.
Glycogen and water, all this other stuff. But you saw that a 3 pound swing, okay? It's all of the stuff you invested into that to get to that point. right? So with jiu-jitsu, I've seen this in myself. Periods of stagnation, you are in that period of stagnation, you realize, hey, maybe my training partners have kind of caught on to what I like to do on the mat. I have to start thinking of new things to do. You start doing those new things, and you can only really maybe do them against the lower level students in class, okay? And you work on it, and then before you know it, you've added 3 new tools to your game, and they seem to click almost overnight. And that's because I invested time and energy over that staircase period, that flat period. And I think you have to understand that a plateau is a period of investment as long as you're doing things correctly, right? Now, if you want to get more pragmatic and say less philosophical about it or something, I think what you could say is, obviously you're going to look at things like sleep, right? Again, that's the killer for so many people is sleep. If we're talking about, say, muscle gain, we're going to look at, hey, when was the last time you tried to actually throw an extra 5 pounds on this bar and actually achieve some sort of progressive overload? If we're talking about muscle gain, you might say, hey, we're going to add 500 calories to your diet 5 days a week because maybe we've reached the limit of what this macro setup looks like for you. If it's endurance, we may say, hey, you're doing zone 2 3 or 4 days a week and your resting heart rate stopped declining. Your goal is to get it lower. We may have to add more time, right? So there may be a change to the strategy, but sometimes the body just holds on to what it is until you've essentially forced it to let go and become something else.
Gotcha. And speaking of things that we can help our clients with, especially, and we've mentioned sleep, nutrition, all that. So one of the things I've noticed in some of the reels, you talk about diet is not optional, which we know. As coaches, we know that, diet is 90% of it, honestly. Is there any one nutritional principle that you refuse to compromise on, regardless of like someone's goals are? I'll
give you two.
Yeah, awesome.
First of all, for long-term success, I don't believe in these extreme things like never eat carbs or something like that. Like a balanced diet should have carbs, proteins, and fats in a way that makes sense for the individual at the particular point in time on their training, right? So when I hear someone say never eat carbs, I immediately stop listening to you. Immediately. Like, I'm sorry, I've got other things to do. I'm not listening to you, okay? But also, I think basic laws always have to be respected. Like, calories in, calories out does matter. However, to the people that doubt that also is a moving target. So like, I've seen a lot of guys who are very, very lean, and they might even be like 220, 240, we'll say single digit body fat. And they eat a startlingly small amount of food because they're so concerned with maintaining their abs all year round.
Yeah.
So in order for them to lose more weight, they might have to eat, like 1,700 calories at that body, which is crazy for that body weight, right? So yes, we could take food away, but we could also rebuild the metabolism through training, through healthier meal choices, through eating a little bit more frequently perhaps. So yes, we increase the calories, but we also may very well increase the metabolic rate as well. So I do think the laws of thermodynamics are immutable. They have to be respected. It's not always as simple as slashing calories out or adding food in. There are certain variables that have to be respected that an experienced coach would know. But at the end of the day, laws of thermodynamics, it's impossible to overlook. It drives me insane when someone who's overweight says, I'm fat because I don't eat enough.
Yeah, jeez. It's like, no, that doesn't work, bro.
It's not a thing. That's not a thing.
Yeah.
It's like that's like saying like, I am broke because I make too much money.
Yeah. It's like,
that's what I'm talking about. It's impossible.
It's because you spend too much money.
Yeah, exactly. 100%.
Yeah, that's for sure. All right. So last question. And this has been a wonderful conversation. So here's the last one, and we can dive into this one. So let's think about looking ahead. Is there a coaching or content shift that you see coming in your world, be it fitness, mindset, business, over the next 2 or 3 years? Any trends that you can kind of look at or think about when it comes to coaching and what we do?
So do you mean for me specifically or for the industry as a whole?
For you and for the industry, both. I would love to hear what your thoughts are.
Sure. So I do think the shift, the split in American culture it's obviously having massive ramifications everywhere, both from like where you live to the media that you take in. I think that the fitness industry has been forced into being, we'll say, vaguely right-wing. Because
vaguely conservative, right?
Yeah, because at the end of the day, certain segments of the population have bastardized and yelled at people who seek self-improvement. And so I think that we're finding ourselves in a situation where we're being labeled something even if we don't want to be that thing, right? And I do think that you will see people, probably myself included, that embrace that a little bit more. Okay. I do think that the industry will become more specific. I think there'll be more exclusivity and less inclusivity as time goes on, meaning like I know who I want to talk to. I'm going to talk to that person. I'm not going to make as much big umbrella content for people that don't see the world the way that I do, who aren't willing to put the work in, or who maybe think that I am evil because I want to be in shape, which is a preposterous notion. Okay.
Right.
I also think as you get older, you do seek greater meaning in life. Like, when I was younger, I would have argued and written, I did argue, and I did write blog posts about how wide your box squat stance should be. Now that I'm pushing 40, I don't care about those things as much. I've internalized my method. I am starting to view my job, my role as a coach, as something greater, which is like helping someone live a better life, be able to give back to their family, to their faith, and so forth. And I would like my messaging to be more of that and less about this is the angle of your hip on a Romanian deadlift. Now, you should know those things, don't get me wrong, but like I find much more meaning helping a father be an able-bodied protector and provider for his family for a longer period of time than I do about getting out an angle protractor and measuring your hip angle on a squat, right?
Yeah.
And I think when you're in this for a long time, that's a natural progression. You're not just going to want to sit there and debate the minutia of your craft. You're going to want to look outward, right? So I do think we'll see more of that, especially for people like you and I that have done this for a while and like we're ready. If you've been in something for a while, you have to evolve. And so that perspective now is, I think you're going to see guys like us that did our thing, now we're getting older, want to give back more and have a broader, maybe like philosophical message, which I personally am very much looking forward to seeing. Now, in terms of the industry, I mean, look, dude, you and I both know it's a giant pendulum, okay? If you want to know about what method is coming next, look at what everyone hates now, okay?
Yeah.
And in 5 years,
flip
everybody
around.
will love it, okay?
Yeah.
And that'll be it, right? So, like, okay, bro splits are in, like, total body, high intensity's out. Okay, sure. Now, in 5 or 10 years, everyone's going to suddenly love Mike Menzer again. And,
and Jordan
Arnold
Peters.
Schwarzenegger's a pussy, right? So,
Yeah.
it's always been that way. If you want to look at specific methods, just look at what is out now. It will be in soon. The only caveat is that someone who wants to make a lot of money will take the Atkins diet, which already was a remarketing thing, and name it their diet and say, yeah, just don't eat carbs and whatever, you'll lose weight.
And it'll be that same cycle yet again.
And they'll sell us it like it was the same, like it's some new idea. Whereas guys like you and me that have been training our whole lives, we've seen it come in and out of style no less than 4 times already.
Gotcha. I said that was the last question, but I lied.
No
I
problem,
do have
dude.
one more question.
No problem.
Talking about lately, so I've become friends and interested a lot in the bodybuilding world. Just to share a personal story, I'm actually in contest prep for the first time.
Wow,
I'm
dude.
doing a show
with
my son who has Down syndrome and wants to do a show who's absurdly ripped. So we're going to do it together.
Awesome.
But my question is to you. How do you approach enhanced athletes versus your natural lifestyle clients? Is there a fundamental approach that you take? Any thoughts on that?
Sure. So there's a few caveats here that we have to touch on. Obviously, we have to be specific to the client's goal, okay? I think if you're talking about athletes, so I'm going to remove bodybuilders from that. We're going to say like field athletes, wrestlers, whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
I kind of take we'll say the European approach to this, even though I am a proud American, insofar as I've noticed a lot of like Russian lifters and athletes, when they take PEDs, their philosophy is almost like, this lets me do 10% more a week. And I'm going to do the 10% more a week And over 5 years, I will have an astronomical advantage on my competition, right? Because now I'm 50% ahead of you. Well, 50% might not sound like a lot in athletics.
Yeah,
That's
it's a compound interest approach.
Like you're not even in the same league. You're 3 leagues down, right? So like I think when it comes to athletes, if I work with jiu-jitsu guys that take anabolics, keep in mind there is no drug testing in jiu-jitsu by and large. So most of the guys are taking steroids or some sort of PED. My philosophy is always this buys us more time on the mat. Okay. Mm-hmm. And also the way this ties into bodybuilding to an extent is the amount of volume that you have to do to build or maintain muscle is significantly less for most people when they're on gear. So the advantage an athlete might have is, okay, maybe I had to do 4 sets of squats, just making something arbitrary up, to make my legs grow. Now, if I'm on anabolics, that number might be 2. Now, that extra recovery can now go elsewhere.
Gotcha.
With less wear and tear on the joints. So now maybe you can practice baseball more, right? All those other things. Now, as it pertains to specifically like hypertrophy or physique-related people, even powerlifting to a certain extent, I think you do notice, I am not a science genius here, so I'm going to say this in the most bro-y terms possible, but like the protein synthesis window, for lack of a better term, around natural athletes versus enhanced athletes is much, much smaller. So when you go lift and you're not on steroids, the amount of time in which your body will respond to that and synthesize new protein, it's maybe something like 24 to 36 hours, maybe 48 hours, meaning that you have to train those muscles again within 48 hours to get another stimulus, okay? If you're on steroids, that number could be 96 hours, okay? Which is part of the reason why bro splits became popular with enhanced bodybuilders is, okay, I destroyed my chest on Monday. I've got 96 hours. I'll hit it again on Friday.
Right.
Okay. And
you can now you have options.
Yes.
Now you have options.
Exactly.
Basically.
Also, look, the margin for error also in a natural guy versus an enhanced guy is very, very different. Like a natural person could really, like, especially if they're good or they want to be great, like if we factor in lifestyle and training and we give you a test score, so like obviously 100% is the best. I don't think a natural guy could ever be below 85% on that test score and see any results, especially if they're higher level. Like there's just, it's just so much more important to eat clean. Like obviously,
you have to be fully dialed in, fully. Completely.
As an example, if you disrespect your sleep and you're natural, well, guess what? Your test levels go down, your GH levels go down. If you disrespect your sleep and you're enhanced, it's still a bad idea. But if you're injecting yourself with testosterone and growth hormone, those numbers will still stay stable, right? Because you're already putting it in your body.
It's exogenous.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
A natural athlete has a much smaller margin of error, whereas everyone has seen enhanced guys that they train hard as fuck, okay, but they don't eat great and they're still shredded. And in a lot of cases, that's the gear doing the work for them, okay? Again, like that's their decision, whatever, but I think you have to respect the difference in like margin of error, and you have to really monitor, I think, for overtraining with natural athletes, again, because if you wind up kind of crashing your endocrine system, you're going to have serious problems because it's going to be that spiral effect where it gets worse and worse and worse and worse, like kind of circling the drain, as they would say, where I think an enhanced athlete has more time to pull themselves out of that tailspin, right? They have more of an option there. Also, one last thing, it is way harder. Like I take testosterone replacement. I used anabolics when I was much younger, barbecued my endocrine system. So I take doctor-prescribed testosterone, and I will for the rest of my life. Unfortunately, it is what it is. And like, it is so much harder, I've noticed this myself, to be really lean and function when you are natural versus enhanced. Because again, as you get lean, your endocrine system gets fucked up. Right? If you're below 7-8% body fat, which most people have no idea how hard that is to get to. Like they think that they're like 8% when they're really 15. Like no one has any idea, right? And so like when they're below a certain level and you're natural, it really messes with your endocrine system. You're tired, you're disastered, you start to get really, really weak. Whereas you could maintain a leaner physique being enhanced, because it's just all the hormones make it so much easier to function and recover. Like a quick aside, I hired Justin Harris, who is one of my favorite coaches in the industry.
I'm familiar with Justin. Very great coach.
I hired him to start doing my nutrition back in November, I want to say, so almost a year ago. And at the time, I was taking a break from jiu-jitsu, and I was just doing a lot of strength work, a lot of hypertrophy training. As I always take breaks every couple of years from jiu-jitsu because there's no off-season. It's not like wrestling where you 8 months on, 4 months off. Like, you might train three consecutive years, 6 days a week. You're like, I'm not getting paid to do this shit. I'm taking a little bit of time off so I could come back. So Justin put a lot of mass on me. I went from 212 to like 233. Now, granted, I was taking testosterone. Like, I'm not going to say that it was done naturally. Okay. But I did learn how hard it was to function being leaner. Like, I started getting back on the mat and training early in the morning. I wasn't eating that much before training. I went out and got my body fat tested, and at the time, it came back in at around 7-8, which was way leaner than I thought I was, because like all guys who train, I have massive body dysmorphia. And I remember talking to Justin and saying, dude, like, what the fuck? And he's like, bro, you're so lean, there's no margin for error with your fuel. You have to get the right fuel. If you don't eat carbs before you train now, you're fucked. If you're 15% body fat, carbs are still more efficient, but there's fat to pull off your system. Okay, if you're 7%, there's way less margin for error. And so to be lean and be natural is really hard. Okay, and like, it takes so much work and discipline. And yes, we all love seeing the freaks out there, but there are guys out there that train naturally that accomplish some very, very impressive goals. And it's like, you have to really do it to understand how hard it is.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. And then there's the whole other conversation, which we won't get into, but as we age, we start having to make choices between, say, that performance versus our longevity, right? And balancing that out. And that's a big combo.
That could be another podcast for another time, but I
absolutely
totally agree.
That is a huge topic that I think is actually kind of critically underserved in our industry.
I think it's going to become, so here's a prediction, because you asked what's going to become the next thing that people are going to discuss. I think that is going to be it, because now we're really starting to see the action heroes of yesteryear, the professional wrestlers of yesteryear age. And you're starting to see some of them are making good decisions and some of them are not. So, as an example, saw a post the other day of how Brock Lesnar looks, who, by the way, I mean, he's an incredible athlete. Probably, there's almost been no human that I'm more scared of than Brock Lesnar. Just to put, just an incredible specimen. But the fact is, Brock is more jacked now than he was in 2004. Okay? Whereas, you contrast that with, say, Barry Bonds. Barry Bonds did what he had to do. Okay? Mark McGwire, same thing. Okay? When they got out of baseball, they lost all the muscle. They got skinny. Barry Bonds now does cycling and jiu-jitsu. And he looks like he weighs 100, right?
Hey, look at the Rock recently. He lost like 50 pounds. And Dave Bautista also. The Rock, they slimmed down.
He's so frustrating because it's like, dude, I know how hard it is to look the way you looked, even when you were on even being on steroids.
Oh, yeah, no doubt.
I don't take anything away from you. And I think he just played Mark Kerr in the Smashing Machine documentary that's coming out.
That's right.
And Mark Kerr has been very open and honest about his anabolic use when he was at his peak. So it's like, if Mark Kerr needed steroids to look like Mark Kerr, then 50-year-old Dwayne Johnson needed steroids to look like Mark Kerr.
Like a 20-something-year-old.
Exactly. So I do think that's going to be a trend. I mean, listen, I see it in myself. Like, I got up to 235. I'm 6'1", 6'2", and like, I noticed that my endurance just wasn't there on the mat. And now, ironically, I'm like trying to lose muscle. I'm 39, and I'm like, dude, I want to be there for my kids. I want my cardio to be a strength of mine again. People, you have to make those decisions. And here's the thing. You could still be high performance if you pick the right thing to perform at. You can't be high performance at bodybuilding or powerlifting without knowing you're going to die very, very young. But you could be a very good, relative to your ability level, endurance athlete or grappler if you are competing in the right weight class and you choose the right methods.
Makes sense. All right, Eric, it has been an awesome hour. Thank you so much for your time. We will absolutely do this again. Who knows? Maybe we'll get into the whole longevity versus performance conversation. It's one that I find. I'm 54, by the way.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I know. This conversation becomes more and more vital as I move forward,
How old is your son?
Oh, he is 26.
Okay.
So
Awesome.
yeah, he's in. I'll send you pictures later. It's absurd how he's looking. We have a vlog. We're kind of like trying to keep a record of how this is going. And our coaches have been amazing. It's been an incredible experience, for real. I never knew like the difference between lifestyle dieting and nutrition versus contest prep. It's like a whole other universe. Mm-hmm. Completely. So, but we're having fun with the process and learning how to pose and all the fun things that come with that. So, but in any case, again, Eric, thank you so much for the time. It was an amazing interview. And everybody, if you like this content, sorry, English is hard. Please hit the button, like, subscribe, ring the bell, all that fun stuff. Eric, again, thank you. Have a wonderful day. Everyone, have a wonderful day.